Justin Trudeau is out of touch and Canadians are out of money. Cost of government is driving up the cost of living. The more Trudeau spends, the more things cost.
Pierre Poilievre, in his first address as leader, he's taking on the Prime Minister and the government's handling of the cost of living crisis. Poilievre is fresh off his landslide win at the Conservative Leadership Convention last weekend. So is this an effective strategy to introduce himself to Canadians and send a message to Liberals? It's Thursday, and At Issue is back. Chantal Hebert, Elamin Abdelmahmoud, Althia and Andrew Coyne. Good to see everybody. I saw some of you last Saturday, but I'm glad we're back in our regular Thursday night date. So we heard a number of things from Pierre Poilievre this week, an address to caucus, talking to the media, losing a Conservative MP, his first. What did we make of his first few days? Andrew, I'm going to start with you.
Well, it was a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, I think everyone thought he gave a very good speech at the convention, or whatever you want to call that where they announced the winner. Clearly had a triumphant day out of that, and well earned. And he certainly got hold of some issues, particularly on affordability, inflation, that are going to give the government fits, and he's a very effective critic on that. But in the meantime, he's also, hadn't been in place for 2 days, and he starts in on the same kind of attack dog strategy. In this case, not directed at the government, but in one case at a member of the media, in another case at a member of his own party, Alain Reyes, who decided to leave the party because he didn't want to serve under him as leader. There's just a certain note of ungraciousness, to say the least, in it, an ability to find enemies under every bed, to turn everybody who criticizes him or disagrees with him or just doesn't jump when he tells them to, turn them into a partisan liberal. And it's not the behavior of somebody who's really on top of his game and feeling self-confident as you would think he would be. Mm-hmm. People who really are kind of natural leaders tend to be quite generous to other people, even to their critics, because they don't feel they have to tear them down. Whereas this kind of ankle-biting style is more, it just seems smaller. It makes him look smaller, and I don't think he seems to realize that or doesn't care.
Althia?
I just don't think he's trying to win everybody. I was struck by the response to Alain Reyes leaving as well. I mean, this is a man who served under one of his very good friends, Andrew Scheer, as Quebec lieutenant, who helped the party expand its base in Quebec, or at least that was the effort in 2019 was quite impressive in terms of the candidates that Mr. Reyes recruited, to basically not even thank him at all for his work, to only say that the reason he's leaving is because he doesn't want to fight Justin Trudeau on inflation, and then for the party to have the gall to send text messages to all the Conservative all the Conservative members in Mr. Reyes's riding, urging them to call his constituency office and tell them that he must resign, is just so out of the norm that I'm thankful that the Conservative Party actually recognized that and issued a tweet apologizing for that behavior. But to Andrew's point, the doxing that might happen to Mr. Poilievre's critics is quite concerning, and it really goes to reaffirm everything that Mr. Reyes said when he decided to leave about the Trump-style divisive politics that Mr. Poilievre was leading, and that's why he was leaving. I mean, Mr. Poilievre just confirmed all of that. So I don't think it was a very good first few days.
Yeah, Mr. Reyes, just to remind people, did support Jean Charest. He was a pretty important part of that campaign, and then felt that he had to leave when Pierre Poilievre was elected. I mean, those are a couple instances of sort of a confrontation or conflict, but I mean, that's not all that happened this week, and he did give a good delivery to caucus, and when you talk to people who were at the caucus meeting, they were delighted to have been at that meeting. So Chantal, what did you make of Poilievre's foray into things?
Yeah, a lot of them were delighted until they discovered what was going to happen over the next 2 days. This was the wrong week to test whether a scorched earth politics that gets you the leadership is something you need to bring in to do well. In this province, every Quebec MP has been hurt by what has happened to Alain Reyes. This was the week when people tuned in. And what they saw wasn't the speech at the convention or the speech to caucus, which plays in the middle of the day and that most of us watch, but most other people don't. The face of the Conservative Party in Quebec over the past few elections has been the Quebec lieutenant. That Quebec lieutenant happens to be a happy political warrior who is called Alain Reyes. And then suddenly you've got people saying we're swamped with calls from people. And if you're going to make this a fight between you and Alain Reyes in Quebec, you will lose. And this week he lost big time. In the same way that if you're going to make it a fight against David Aiken in the press gallery, someone who used to work for Sun TV, not a very liberal place, you will lose. So I think their instincts got in the way of their best week for Canadians to have the first look at the new Conservative leader.
Elamin?
I just don't think they've planned this far yet, right? Like, I don't think they've planned much further than the launching speech at the convention event, which was a very good speech. We all talked about how effective it was, how he sort of drew a different image than we've been used to from Pierre Poilievre. The problem is you got to go back to work on Monday. And going back to work on Monday means sort of returning to the thing that made you famous. And so we kind of return to the pugnacious style sort of politics that we've seen from him all along. It sort of gives a split screen idea of what Pierre Poilievre is trying to do of, okay, is he trying to change the channel of how people view him, which is what we saw at that convention event? Or is he trying to be the thing that made him, a household name, at least among Conservatives, which is exactly the performance that he had this week. And it feels like they've not made up their minds just yet, but also it's been 6 days, so maybe it can take some time.
Yeah, Chantal,
by the way,
Chantal then Andrew. Yep.
Just to mention, if they did eventually apologize in a very weird way, as in the machine made us do it, about the Alain Reyes text, sorry that your computers are writing for you to specific people. But the only reason they had to do that is because they would have had a hard time holding caucus together. A lot of the MPs who are not with them have their hands on the door handle. And yesterday was a really bad day, enough of a bad day that people who never apologize about anything and never back off had to do that.
Andrew?
Every political victory carries the seeds of potential defeat, which is to say, you win because you have a tight-knit group of advisors who make big bets and you carry it off. And the danger is that you come to believe that you can't do any wrong, you can't make any mistakes. Yeah. And so you start losing touch with how other people are seeing you outside of the particular group of your admirers. He's had 6 months where he's been talking to groups of people who just love everything he says. Yep. Now he's in a very different world, and you got to adjust and be able to see how other people are seeing it.
Except, as you say, Althia, maybe he doesn't care if other people are seeing him in a different way. Maybe that's okay for him.
Well, I think he cares about caucus. I think part of the over-response to Alain Reyes is a warning shot across the bow to all the other MPs. This is what will happen if you leave. And it kind of harkens back to days under some parts of the Stephen Harper rule. But I think in terms of the general population, no, they don't think this has legs. This is not to whom this is directed. They have a very tailored message to young people on housing, for example, that seems to be resonating. They are trying to embrace an electoral strategy that is completely different than Erin O'Toole's strategy in 2021, in the sense that they want to bring those PPCers into the Conservative fold and they want to depress Liberal votes. And if they make the political climate so toxic that lots of voters decide that they want to stay home because it's not worth engaging, then they will have won.
Politicians face a very simple choice. Do you allay those fears and empower people and show them how we're going to build a better future? Or do you amplify those fears for short-term political gain?
Prime Minister there reacting to Pierre Poilievre's win as Conservative leader, responding back to criticism from Poilievre, of course, that his government's handling of the inflation crisis. How will the dynamic play out between the two of them in the coming days? At issue is back. Chantal, Elamin, Andrew, and Althia. Elamin, I said you'd start us off. What did you make of both the Prime Minister's speech to caucus? He was out in New Brunswick, and then those sort of questions that he took the following day, in terms of sort of broadly painting politicians who create fear as a way to motivate people?
I mean, this is a prime minister who, for the last couple of elections, has been a little bit comfortable with, very carefully orchestrating some divisions, right? He's sort of wielded the wedge issue weapon very carefully, and I think he's done that in the last 2 elections. At least part of his campaign has been about making the Conservatives a little bit more scary, and at least trying to tell voters that the Conservative Party is a scary party. So now for him to say that politicians ought to be careful about doing that, or that Canadians should be careful about politicians who are trying to do that, struck me as a little bit rich, but also at the same time, it makes a lot of sense because that is the kind of narrative that we've seen coming from Pierre Poilievre. Of course, the Liberals would want to remind people as much as possible that Poilievre was very comfortable with the Freedom Convoy from earlier this year, without necessarily saying those words at the same time. So it was sort of trying to do a lot of things all at once, but they just have to be careful with how they handle that.
Chantal?
It's early days, and I think the Liberals are still watching and figuring out how to get under the skin of Pierre Poilievre. And I don't think that the Prime Minister had a lot of impact this week outside of Liberal circles, because all eyes were on Pierre Poilievre. But what they did learn this week that is very useful is how thin a skin he and his team have. And I think not just the Liberals, also the Bloc Québécois thought they had a good week watching.
Andrew?
Just to amplify Elamin's point, every election since I've been a voter, basically the Liberal tactic has been to raise fears about the Conservatives on whether it's on guns or abortion or Medicare. It is part of their playbook. It is, in many cases, their only play. It's not just designed, of course, to depress Conservative vote. It's to scare NDP voters into the Liberal corral. So they're past masters of that. The difference here, you could say, is that the irrationality of the fears that Poilievre has been playing to, in particular during this campaign, things like the World Economic Forum or calling vaccine mandates vaccine vendettas and that sort of thing, because that plays to not a particularly rational voter. And the concern is that you're normalizing the abnormal. You are making things which were previously viewed as fringe concerns seem somehow legitimate. And that does things to our politics that aren't particularly pleasant.
Althia, last word to you.
The Liberals Andrew's right that the Liberals have been using that playbook, but some of those fears are legitimate fears. There's, I think, a difference to be made between criticism that you levy against a political party that are based on legit fears, whether that's abortion or climate action, versus taking an issue and politicizing it like they did with mandatory vaccination and like purposefully picking an issue to drive wedges. And I think what we're seeing in Justin Trudeau and the Liberals this week is that they're kind of trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. I do think that they recognize that some of the comments that they made in the last election were unhelpful, that some of the comments that he made during the Freedom Convoy were not helpful, and that if they are going to draw comparison and contrast between Pierre Poilievre, then they do need to go back to that language that worked so well for them in 2015, the positive, inclusive, hope, and hard work. Like these are, he could have been talking about himself in the clip that you played. And so it is interesting to see how they are going to try to fix their error, if you wish, because I think that's what we're trying to see, what we're starting to see.
Okay, everyone, I'm glad that you're back. I'm glad that we're back. Good to see you all, and I'll see you next week. Thanks.